My guest today is Julie Ellis, co-founder of Mabel's Labels. Julie and 3 other moms started making personalized kids' labels in a basement in 2003. 13 years later, they sold the company to Avery or CCL Industries, the world's largest label maker, in what became one of Canada's most talked about exits by women entrepreneurs.
And she opened the inbox. She sent one of our other co-founders a message that said, I think we have a virus because there are so many orders in the inbox right now. I don't know what's going on. I think the other thing you learn is even when you think your diligence ready, you are not. We had a spreadsheet that had like 17 or 18 tabs on it with at least 3 to 10 items per tab that was involved in what we needed to pull together for due diligence. And we didn't have it all. I took like 3 days in February after it closed because I said to my children, I was like, I was really mean at Christmas. I'm really sorry. There was somebody I had on my podcast and she talked about how you have to add before you subtract. My efforts and my heart was in building that business. And so when I did the giant subtract of leaving, I had not thought about, what were the things I should add in. And I think that kind of contributed to getting me stuck.
Is there one piece, one kind of action that you think a founder could do now if they're 2 years out from thinking about starting a sale process?
2 years is a magic time for setting up structures and, for the IQ pieces of the business, making sure that your practices and processes and all those things are good. But I think it's also a great time for you to start thinking about what you really want.
All right. So let's go back to when you started. Take me back to 2003. You're managing, client assets. You're a financial planner.
Mm-hmm.
What was the moment where you thought, I should start a label company in a basement with 3 other moms?
Right. Well, we were all having young kids. And, we were sending them to daycare and nursery school, those kinds of places. And, they would say, please label everything. And when you asked, how should we do that? The answer was masking tape and a Sharpie, which isn't pretty. And it actually doesn't last. So if you put a masking tape label on like a bottle or a sippy cup and you run it through the dishwasher 3 or 4 times, your marker is nearly gone. So we felt like there was a product market opportunity there based on our knowledge as moms and based on talking to the people that we knew. And I think we were all ripe for change in our, situations in our careers. And, I was in a situation for me where I wanted to get promoted. I wanted to advance in my career. And I didn't want to get on a commuter train and go into the city every day where I was, at least in the best case scenario, I was an hour away from my kids when the daycare called and said they were sick.
Yeah. And you're speaking to me as someone who doesn't know the pain of labels washing away because I have only ever, with my 2 young kids, had Mabel's labels.
Yeah.
And so I thank you from all the parents out there today for making that easier and also more fun and playful for the kids to choose their own designs and really personalize them. So thinking about, 4 founders coming together, there's challenges in that. And everyone, the play would be, at least 1 co-founder, but 4. What made you believe as a team that it could work at that time?
We had a good variety of skills and we could divide up the jobs really well to, get a little farther, a little faster before we had to hire anybody. So I would say in the beginning, that was our real value proposition. We are also all related. So it was a family business, which, gave us a little more, I think, reason to have care in how we wanted to come out the other side. We went into this business as friends.
That's beautiful. And there is something more to it than just a business or an asset. There is this sort of sense of, hey, you're solving your own personal problems as moms, first and foremost, that you saw. You saw a gap in the market. You went to go solve your own problems.
Yep.
You did it. And as we'll get to, you scaled that and you didn't just sort of start with an MVP. You were able to get all the way to a multi-million-dollar exit. What was it in terms of the family or sort of the friends and then that coming together that made this, do you think, sort of more of an advantage for you in creating more of a legacy kind of component here?
Yeah, I think it came together just in a way that allowed us all to do what we did really well.
Yeah.
And there was a good balance of that sort of like visionary. There was a good balance of ability to operationalize, and run the various pieces, even though we did have somebody who came into the founding group with a printing background, but she never managed production. And so, we were each able to build out a skill set and help ourselves to grow, both personally in the skill sets we had, but also like collectively in terms of growing a bigger business.
So having very clear accountability from the very beginning,
Yeah.
which is often in my experience something that we miss as co-founders. You're kind of doing everything. You're wearing every
Yes.
hat. You've designed the business around yourselves, but you have four of you to multiply
Yeah.
your impact pretty early. It's interesting.
Yep. And early on, it's really advantageous. Later on, you have to be a little more careful about not creating silos,
Yeah.
because we tried really hard not to step on each other's toes, but to let us run the things we were responsible for running. But at the same time, you have to be a little careful that, it's not you're each building your own little fiefdom within the bigger company. And I mean, you hear stories about companies where that has happened with co-founders. So it was always trying to find that balance of like letting each other do our jobs, but coming together to make the big important decisions and having a good regular cadence on doing that.
So let's go back. We're going to time travel a little bit. So, very early days, you go from an idea that you're talking about to forming a partnership to formalizing this business. When did you know that it wasn't just some cute idea to solve your own problem? And hey, whoa, we really have something here. What was that moment? If you could take me back to that.
We had gotten a really tiny, tiny little write up in a magazine called Canadian Living. And at the time, they had these parenting pages in the back. And, it was literally like 1.5 by 2.5 inches. We're talking like a tiny write up. And it had been, a few months later, and all of a sudden, the business was in my sister-in-law's basement at that time, and she could just hear the phone ringing on all day. And she was planning to work that night, and typically that was the rhythm. We would make labels at night. We still all had our day jobs. She was home with her kids that day, and finally, her curiosity got the better of her, and she went down, and it was somebody wanting to place an order. And when she opened the inbox, she sent one of our other co-founders a message that said, "I think we have a virus because there are so many orders in the inbox right now. I don't know what's going on."
Oh my gosh.
And, all day this kept happening. And, she didn't really know what had happened, but we could see that all of the orders said daily candy, the daily candy. And it turns out with a little research, we found out this was a subscriber newsletter out of New York. And every week on, I think it was Wednesday, they had the kids' candy. And so the candy of the day was the thing everybody needed to have. And we were that candy of the day that day. And they had thousands of subscribers at that time. And so we had more orders than we knew what to do with. I mean, at the end, when we counted them, so it took us, all four of us, kind of, calling in sick to work and,
Yes.
getting our like family members to come and help us. And, at that time, like my mother-in-law was handwriting our envelopes. Like
Oh,
we were producing very, very small quantities of labels. And so it took us kind of like 4 or 5 days to get all these labels made. We, in the end had like, lids from the photocopy paper reams, and we were counting how many orders was, and it was about 375, I think. And to us that
Woo.
just felt like it was so much. We realized we needed to start to update processes. Like there was volume, it was going to come, and we weren't ready. So it was an opportunity, but that was in January. And
Mhm.
then by October of that year, we came back from Thanksgiving and we had a message on our voicemail, and we moved offices. So we moved from one basement to a bigger basement because we had an idea that my sister-in-law should just buy a bigger house so we could have a bigger office. And she
I
did.
love it.
And we came back to this voicemail after Thanksgiving that said, "Hey, I'm a producer on The View. And one of our hosts is having a baby, and we're going to have a baby shower on camera. and she's asked for your product to be in that lineup. And so
Wow.
that,
Wow.
then very quickly, she, the host stood there, held up an item with our label on it and said, I could not live without these. And then
Wow.
that was the biggest 24 hours in our sales history to that point. And that was something like about 900 orders.
And then from there, I mean, I've followed the headlines around Gwyneth Paltrow, Reese Witherspoon, all of these
Yeah.
incredible celebrity moms. And so
Yeah.
just seeing how I'm hearing a problem that you had that clearly resonated with
Yeah.
thousands, millions of folks around, down to, the quality of the product that you had
Yeah.
created that created raving fans to then have that earned media attention. And that, I imagine, put you on the map. When did you decide, hey, I'm going to leave my financial planning background behind and take the leap and go all in
hmm
on this?
It was at somewhere between the 18-month, 20-month, and 24-month, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
We sort of had this crossroads that we sat at where we were like, we were not paying ourselves at that point,
Yeah.
and the business needed all of us. I like
Yeah.
to talk about when I was, kind of 8 months pregnant with my third child. I was working 2 full-time jobs. I was working my financial planning job and I was working at Mabel's Labels. And one day my husband said, Julie, we can't do this anymore. And I was like, really?
Surprise.
What do you mean?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I think
And
about you. I truly think about all of you and the fact that all of your kids were quite young, right? I have 2
yeah,
young kids under 4, and
yep,
it is not easy building a company
yeah,
while you're also, dealing with literal mess. It's
yep,
messy. Life is messy. It's also
yeah,
beautiful. So what was that
yeah,
phase like? And as you're building, if you think of anyone listening who's building a business perhaps and has young kids, what was that experience like? How did that, if you did, how does that shape you in the way that you built
yeah.
the company?
It was a lot of juggling with, so when I had my third, my older 2 were 3 and 5. And I know one of my co-founders likes to say, when I had that baby, her maternity leave ended and she had had a baby 15 days before me. And so we were really in
Wow.
that, we were doing the juggle. And it was a big juggle, and we were making labels late into the night, and we had a little bit of help at that time, but we didn't have anybody working full time into, that came in the year after. But we kind of hit that crossroads where it's like, look, if we're going to make a go of this, we have to find a way to pay ourselves. And
Yeah.
so, because I need to work at my job and I can't do that and do this sustainably. And so we had to sort of say, okay, well, what if we paid ourselves $500 a month? And, then let's see how that goes. And okay, so that went okay. Can we pay ourselves $1,000 a month? And, we just kind of started inching our way upward until we got to a place where it was something, I don't know if it was really livable, but it was not, we were able to stay away from our other jobs. And,
Yeah.
then we worked with our accountant over a long period of time to sort of get us up to, market salaries and look at other ways of compensation and all the things that you do as your business grows.
And as your business grows, you start the business, it's designed around the 4 of you. How did that look? 'Cause one of the things we were talking about earlier in past conversations was just how you prepared for conversations for potential buyers. You felt like you were fairly
Hmm.
well prepared on the business side, on the IQ side of the house. Was there anything that you did to redesign the business as it scaled to ensure that it could scale beyond the 4 of you?
Well, we invested in software from a very early point, like probably not long after that first big rush. We knew we needed something to make our label making more automated. So a combo of that, software assist and upgrading equipment. So there was a bit of an equipment evolution over time until we kind of got to probably, well, something that was a lot more expensive. So that's why we kind of couldn't start there. But that combo kind of gave us today, the label making would be largely automated. There's still
Right?
humans involved, but it is, compared to, you look at the very beginning when we were actually like typing names, and then we were cutting and pasting, and then we had barcodes, and then and so like it was a journey of building software. We could not find software in the market that could do what we needed, so we had to build our own. And
Wow.
that is, there isn't a technical founder in the four. So that is also a journey when you're, and I hear a lot of entrepreneurs today talking about that, right? Because everybody needs technology.
Completely. Well, and
Yeah.
I think just in terms of building the team, and I had a founder recently ask me the question, and they're early in their journey towards building to sell. They're kind of 2 to 3 years away, and they're wondering about the importance of team and surrounding yourself with the right people.
Hmm.
Because yes, there's tools, and that's all critical to enable the growth as you're going. But tell us, like, as you think about the team and the way this all came together, as you look back with some distance,
Hmm.
what was it about the team that made this really work?
So I think that the four of us at the helm, and we really did run it as co-CEOs until we sold. Um, and we can talk about
Interesting.
why I think it made us open to selling a little bit later. But we knew that we didn't know a lot. None of us had been entrepreneurs before. We were, direct to consumer e-commerce was really in its early phases of, um, like we had trouble getting merchant numbers because they were worried about unsigned sales drafts, like things, there was no Shopify, there was no Facebook,
Right.
there was no Instagram. So it was early days of selling things on the internet. And we knew we knew there was a lot we didn't know. And so because of that, we were always very resourceful about mentors and advice and bringing
Hmm.
people around the table to kind of help us navigate. And some of those early wins were really, leaning on a professor that we had taken courses from at University of Waterloo when we were undergrads. And for some reason, he decided to give us audiences. I call them audiences. We go to his little office and
Like a salon. I love it. I
yeah,
love it.
sit and chat with him every 6 months or year. And, he didn't invest in companies like ours, but he was a bit fascinated with what we were doing. And, at one of those meetings, he kind of like flipped a light switch on above me by saying, your accountant's not doing his job.
Huh.
You shouldn't be trying to solve this problem yourself. You should have help and support from them.
Right.
And I was just like, you are right. Why is this on me? I'm not getting the advice I need. And so he suggested, he said, look, I think I know someone who would be great for you, also a former student of mine. And I think you should at least have a conversation. And so that conversation actually led to our first piece of work, being that he helped us go through a strategic planning exercise. And then we hired him as our accountant. And so he was always a strategic advisor to us in terms of, the financial side of the business, but that he knew the business as a whole quite well.
Strategic planning. Let's talk about this a little bit. And for some founders, you're building, you're taking action. We default to action, or we
Yes.
die, right? Like that's ultimately the feeling as you're building something and you're scaling it. But at a certain point, you need to be thoughtful about the direction of the company.
Hmm.
And so I've had conversations with founders who have built a phenomenal business that's very stable, that's core, they've scaled it, and then they get to a point where they go, what's next? Where else can we
Hmm.
grow? What's the path?
Yeah.
And a lot of them, there's a lot of fear around taking that big strategic next bet and a lack of understanding around, how do I make a strategic, thoughtful decision? So I'm thinking about you all, the four of you. You're
Yeah.
bringing all of these advisors around you, which is very smart because it sounds like you knew what you didn't know and you wanted to build your knowledge and look outside. And so from that end, how did you think about strategic bets? How did you kind of plan
Hmm.
for the future and building more value in the business? Did you think about it that way? And, decision making with four of you,
Yeah.
co-CEOs, that's not easy, I'm sure. So I'd love to get a sense of what that looked like in a Mabel's Labels basement or boardroom as you
Yeah.
evolved.
Well, I think that it's probably, if you think about the four of us, it's why we led ourselves to things that were a little bit more structured. Because if we could hash it all out and get a plan together for how we were going to go forward that year. Then we could set budgets and people could go and do. And
Mhm.
so it kind of kept us like, it got us all on the same page. It got us to all buy into what it was we were going to chase and go after. And then it kind of just gave us that cadence then that we could go on with rolling it out. And so we'd have kind of a 3 to 5 year vision, but we'd have a really, really strong 1 year plan or two. We'd have a sense of beyond the 1 year, but the 1 year would be really buttoned in. And, we'd set 90% of the budget, and we, went through processes like, we need to hire 13 people. We can afford 7. What are the 7 we're going to hire? How are we going to
Yeah.
rank them? How are we going to map it so that we know when we need to start recruiting, so we get the person in the chair at the right time? Like,
Yeah.
we had quite a lot as time went on. We had quite a lot of structure. And I think it really did help us to, kind of stick together in terms of being on the same page about where we were going.
Completely. And this is something that I do think some founders may be allergic to the idea of structure. The idea of, and we would say it's important to be diligence ready, even if you
Mm,
decide to never sell your business, building
yes.
it in that way, right? Like building playbooks, SOPs, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yep.
So the business can live on without you.
Yeah.
Imagine, you,
Yes.
God forbid, right? So
Because I
I'm
think
curious,
the
like,
other
what's your
thing,
reaction to that? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think the other thing you learn is, even when you think you're diligence ready, you are not. And there will
Mm,
still be a lot of work that you have to do to actually meet like, we had a spreadsheet that had like 17 or 18 tabs on it, with at least 3 to 10 items per tab that was
yeah,
involved in what we needed to pull together for due diligence.
yeah,
And we didn't have it all. We
yeah.
had to, some of it we weren't ever going to have. So, to be clear, there were a few items like that, but we had a lot, and we had, strong financials and strong HR practices, but there was a lot that we had to, it was a lot of work.
Well, let's get into that. And
Mhm.
again, lots of distance to be able to look back. And if you were thinking about the entrepreneur we're speaking to, how could they prepare from the preparation standpoint? So shifting in, you get a call from
Yes.
Avery. Talk us through that moment. So you've built this company. You're around 60 employees. Is that right?
Mhm.
Where were you in
40.
terms
We
of the
were around
company?
40
You're 40.
employees. Yeah.
Okay. Walk us through
And
that.
yeah, we got a voicemail one day in July. And it was, we kind of knew, we didn't really know how closely we were being watched, but we knew we were poking the bears because we had done things like bring a retail product to market and sell it at
Yeah.
Walmart and sell it at Target. And in the category of stationery, we were hitting up against, Avery and other big players. And
Hmm.
we were outselling them. And because we had a brand name at that point, right? We were, 8, 9, 10 years into the business. We had a brand recognition. We leveraged the 100,000+ Facebook followers we had. We
Yep.
sent them out to Target and Walmart to
Mabel's
buy
Hood.
them.
Is that right? Mabel's
What's
Hood was the
the
community that you
Mabelhood?
built on
Yep.
Facebook. Yeah.
The
Mabel Hood.
Mabelhood. Yep.
Love it.
And so we were doing well.
Mm.
However, we were also at this crossroads where we were trying to figure out what the next era was going to look like, in terms of, we knew the 4 of us as co-CEOs could only take the business so far. There needed to then, you need to kind of like consolidate into a more traditional pyramid of leadership. And, how were we going to do that? Did we want it to be us? Did we want to hire from outside and become the board? Did we, we were like exploring. We had no real answers to what we were going to do, but we had been exploring what it could look like.
Yeah.
And so when the call came, it was like, well, we're already exploring. And we also, I think, have always had the view of, never say no.
Mhm.
You're always gonna take the phone call and see what it is. Like, because you just never know. And we had been approached in the past by always taking the phone call. And so it was good strategy. And I think at that particular time, we were trying to figure out where we were going next. And so their call really couldn't have come at a better time.
So who was it
Um,
that called? Was it the CEO? Was it their corp dev?
it was a woman who was tasked with acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
But she was pretty high up in Avery, in the Avery
Yeah.
organization. And, they were out in California. And so she was sort of the president's right hand. The two of them, or the general manager, I think is the real title. But they came out and saw us, and we had a meeting, and we went out for dinner, and we saw one of their properties, like a label making factory. That's very impressive. And that was really kind of where the conversation started. So they had
How did
not
that?
come to see us in our own facility, but we
Uh,
had, met and that sort of thing. And every time we kind of talked to them, we were like, okay, well, like, is the gate going to open or is it staying closed? And we'd be like, no, let's open the gate and see what happens next.
and keep exploring. Be open is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Open to the possibility. And I'm
Yeah.
curious too, just in terms of how did that feel?
Kind of thrilling, like, and pretty
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah, and there was a lot of thought about, like, we were at that point, it was 12 years in, almost
Mm-hmm.
13. So,
Yeah.
you do start thinking about, like, okay, we're building this. How are we going to how are we going to get money off the table at some point? Like, is this
Yeah.
our, retirement? Like, what will happen here? And
Yeah.
that maybe was more me because my financial planner brain thinks that way.
Yes.
Um, but it
This
is
is
that
your
piece, right? Like, you start to get to be like, this is the asset. I have
yes.
invested so much in this. Now, how am I going to kind of use this to get to something later?
You've built the equity. How do we unlock the
Yeah,
wealth? And the fact that
because
you had
it's
that mindset,
yeah.
which is a powerful framework. I'm curious, as you think about entrepreneurs, a lot of folks, and I myself included when I was building, I wasn't thinking of my business as an asset. I was thinking of
Mm,
it as a job, frankly, as a mission, as a,
yes.
need to solve a problem in the world and make the world a little bit better. Now on the other side, and I spend some time in private equity, my mindset completely sees building a business a little bit differently.
Mhm.
As you approach thinking about, the entrepreneurs you work with, do you see that as a common mindset, that job versus asset mentality?
Yes, and I think so often we have our heads down and we're working
Yeah.
really hard, and so we're more in the business than on
Yeah.
the business. It's like that mindset
Yeah.
shift of, and I see so many people who don't pay themselves a fair salary. And
Yeah.
they're not, and it's like you've got to, in my view, you have to figure that out, because if you can't pay yourself a real world salary and later you can't sell the business as an asset, you've wasted a lot of time,
Yes.
in terms
Yes.
of like your income earning potential years. You've got to you've got to find a way, because,
Completely.
hiring a big team and paying them all a fair wage and paying yourself something that's not appropriate is not, I don't believe that that is
No.
right.
No, especially when it needs to be sustainable. And building for 12 plus years, I mean, it needs to be a sustainable marathon,
Yeah.
not necessarily a sprint.
Yes.
Um, but definitely empathize with the founder story. I remember one day I was choosing to not pay myself so I could pay the team, right? Just to get through a crunch. And
Yes.
you live those lives, right?
Yes.
And that is why I think that your story is just, and our stories as we share them, is incredibly powerful. But
Yeah.
that is the important question that every entrepreneur needs to ask, which is, what am I doing with this business? Whether
Yeah.
you choose to sell it or not, there's many exit paths, but it is true. You've put risk in. Hopefully there's some sort of gain. And so
Yeah.
talk us through the actual phase when you said, let's pursue this a little bit. Let's see where this goes. What did
Yeah.
that look like for you?
Well, I spent my time. So at that time, we um, had an operational advisor who was working with the founder group, and he kind of came alongside us during this process. So he had some experience, and he had some ability to weigh in with us. And then we also used our accountant, and we hired a deal lawyer.
Yeah.
So we never hired like an M&A specialist, or that didn't end up being the path, although
Yep.
it could have been at some point. Um, and so I kind of like started my day every day with calls. By 8 o'clock, I was talking to the accountant, the lawyer, and the ops guy
Yep.
every single day. basically, was how my day started. And I took the lead for making sure the deal room and the, back facing pieces were put together and we could answer the questions that they were going to have. And
That's
then
great.
and I had certainly had help from my co-founders with that. But then one of the other co-founders took the lead on facing the buyer. So we kind of divvied it up in that way. Um, and then
That's
the
great.
lawyer and the accountant were obviously involved, like across the board.
And so talk to me about the timeline and deals move quickly and time does kill deals, right?
It does.
Any delay can
It does.
absolutely derail this. So
Yeah.
art, more than a science, in many
Yeah.
cases is people, this is relationships, it's trust and spreadsheets, but mostly it's
Yeah.
relational, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah. So
your deal moved fairly fast, right? July to December,
yes,
5 months, was
5
that right?
months. It was like
Oh
5
my
months and
gosh.
5 days or something along those lines.
That's above
Yes.
average for speed. Just for folks listening,
It's a
typical
lot.
M&A processes are 6 to 12 months.
It
So
was a
what did that
lot.
look like?
Like,
Oh my
I told you
gosh.
how big the spreadsheet was.
Yep.
We had good practices, but even then depending on what kind of deal you're doing, right? Like this was a multiple of EBITDA deal. So you are like combing through your books, seeing what you
Yep.
can add back to your EBITDA because you're just trying
Mhm.
to, get your EBITDA up, right? Okay, well, we just built a new website. Let's add that back. Like you just look for everything that you can find that you could add back when you're doing an EBITDA
Mhm.
based multiple.
Yep.
So that's a lot of work. And
And actually
then
just
go
calling
ahead.
that out, this is something that we work with folks on to learn, but the power of the normalization and
Yeah,
the adjusted
huge.
earnings. A lot of folks don't realize this, but if a buyer is not going to incur something like a one-time expense, like your investment in your website, let's just
Mhm,
say, as an example, it's that you have to defend these, but these are effectively credits so you can add back to your EBITDA to
mhm.
enhance it. Conversely, if you're paying yourself $1 million salary and a buyer goes, "Oh, market for this is 300,000," you're going to have to adjust it the other way. But
Yep.
was that a surprise for you, or had you been sort of keeping track of your normalizations over the past little bit?
We had not really been keeping track of our normalizations, but we had a very strong finance team. We had a VP of finance. He had two people working for him. We had our outside accountant who was also really
That's great.
strong and knew the business really well. So we were well positioned to, and we had strong processes because we were dealing with it. It was like a volume business, right? So, you're selling a lot of a small ticket item and
Yeah.
so the financial process is to make sure that you're properly reconciling and you understand what's happening within those sales because you
Mhm.
literally can't, well, you could, but we didn't. We did a daily reconciliation. So the sales totals were going in as lump sums every day. And
Oh,
there was backup for that, but it kept to the books with less transactions, right? Because if you're
right.
doing 1,000 orders of labels every day, like having 1,000 transactions going through your books would be a lot.
Oh, totally.
Um, so we had sort of daily reconciliation processes. And so it was, and honestly, I could be like, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. Like it was pretty easy to pull a lot of them out.
Yep.
And then it also depends, like, are the founders staying? Because if
Right.
not, you should be crediting back your salary. What are the different pieces that
Very good
can
point.
add back?
Had the four of you aligned on what you each wanted before starting that, even getting the call with Avery? Or was that something you had to develop over time
We
during
had to
diligence?
we had to develop it really. And then figuring out who was going to actually run it because the way that they acquire businesses is that they hire them to run themselves. And
Completely.
so we weren't at no time ever was part of the conversation. There's a campus, we're going to put you here, which was part of why we were interested, because they bought businesses and let them run themselves. And so we could stay in Hamilton. We would stay in our same spot. The acquirer was Canadian. Like there were a bunch of boxes that were yeses for us when it came to that. And I mean, today we're going to be 10 years since the sale at the end of this year. And
Wow.
they're still in the same building.
Wow.
It's beautiful. They've done a
That's
big
cool.
renovation there. Like they are. And, I would say still about a quarter of the team who was there 10 years ago is still there.
That is an
So,
incredible
yeah,
outcome, isn't
yeah,
it? From a
it
legacy
is.
perspective, right?
It
You've
is.
seen it live on. So before
Mhm.
we jump into your personal side and life after 10 years, incredible. Happy anniversary. Wow. Um,
Thanks.
in terms of the ride that you were on during those 5 months and, all the sort of pre-call with the core team before 8 a.m. rituals you were doing, I'm just curious, was there any moment during diligence where you thought, I don't know if this is gonna happen?
No, I don't think I let myself think that. Like, I just kept
Yeah.
thinking, "Okay, next gate, next gate, next gate. Here's the list. Gotta do that." Like, I really did.
Yeah.
I really put my head down, took on an avalanche of work, so I didn't think about those kinds of things.
Yeah, and so if you're a founder, if you're, ultimately, you're wearing multiple hats here. You're
Mhm.
still having to demonstrate growth in your business while
Yes.
also running this process, while
Mhm.
also holding the cards very close from
Mhm.
a, transparency perspective, not bringing anyone in, keeping it
Yep.
very, very small. Who did you bring in to that very, very core team internally? Was it just the four of you who had privy information to this happening?
No, we needed our finance person. We needed his
Your
help.
VP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There
Okay.
wasn't really any other way we could have gotten to the finish line.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
great, but still a very small team, and that's a key
Yes.
message here for a lot of folks. I've spoken with a founder who had unfortunately revealed it a little bit too early, and that
Mhm.
caused a lot of angst, and the deal is not closed
Yes.
until it is literally in your bank
Yes.
account
And
closed,
and I mean, we
right?
were under an NDA, right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
also pretty common that you're asked
Yeah.
about non-disclosure, especially if you're being acquired by, like, we're being acquired by a public company. So, you
Yes.
have to, there is a duty of care
Yeah.
and not talking too much about it,
Yeah. And
and not telling
so
too many people.
you get to the end. So
Yeah.
walk us through kind of those key milestones to the point where you're in the transition period. How did that look like? And I don't know if you can reveal anything from like again, whatever you can share. But for a lot of folks listening, they think of an exit as a transaction. It's a moment in
Yes.
time when
Yes.
in fact there is a whole phase here.
Yes.
And then there's typically a transition period, which is
Mhm.
typically on average 2 years, depending on. And then there's deal structure with that. So
Yeah.
are you able to share a little bit about your deal structure?
So yeah, well, it feels like a giant race, right? So you're
Mm,
in this race to a finish line. It's a lot of work, right? And like
yeah.
finance has a lot of work because they're being asked to provide forecasts. Like not only are they trying to, like, once you've agreed, then it's like, well, we need this forecast and that forecast, and what about this? And we need to
What's the
see,
future?
like, what are
What
all
am I
your
buying?
equipment leases and
Yeah,
all of the things.
yeah,
And then you cross the line and you're ready for a vacation, quite frankly. But
yeah,
then you have to tell people, integrate, talk to the new
yeah.
people, provide another million financial forecasts because you're working now with a different group of people who weren't involved in the deal
Mhm.
making. And so you're like, do you not know anything about our business? And they're like, no, actually, we don't. and and
Wow.
so that's where it is this, like, I never really thought of it as a starting line, but it really is a starting line of the new
Mm,
era. And that era is also frantic in those first weeks
mhm.
and months.
So did you have any time off in that
I think
transition?
I took like 3 days in February after it
Yeah.
closed, because I said to my children, I was like, "I was really mean at Christmas. I'm really sorry." It was so stressful in those
Mm,
last days, right? And,
no kidding.
you're trying to figure out exactly how everything's gonna land and what the communication plan is and, all the different pieces, so that you can actually sign on the dotted line and get the deal done.
Mhm.
Um, that yes, it was, so I took 3 or 4 days off and we took a little mini trip and then it was really back because it was really busy in those early days. And it did not take me very long to kind of figure that one of the hard things in a way about 4 co-founders, is that the size of the business, we made room for all of us. But in the
Yeah.
after the size of that business, it was more difficult to see room for me in my own view. And I think my
Yeah.
co-founders would tell you something different. But for me, in my own view, I struggled to see where my place was.
That's challenging, right? And
Yeah. And it is that place where I think like my best skill is getting to the strategy table and figuring out, okay, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Like looking at what are the options. And I can really quickly start to see, no, nope, nope, nope. I think it's these
Mhm.
two. Which one's going to get us, where we want to go? And once you get acquired, that isn't necessarily what they need from you.
This is a
And
really key point to
yeah.
talk about. And so you end up going from founder,
Hmm.
owner, employee. You
Yeah.
sign employee agreements,
Yep.
essentially. What did that look like for you? How did that is that part of what you were feeling? I mean, 13 years? Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yep. Just about.
As a business
Um,
owner, there's a big identity shift with that in a
yes.
span of 3 or 4 days off to
Yes.
quickly flip that switch.
where
That's
you're
abrupt.
wrangling your three kids in a theme park. Like that's
Oh
really
my
not
god,
what you're
yes.
thinking about, right? You're trying
No.
to you're doing more of a like let's have a family celebration than you are trying to contemplate your own future.
So just
So,
thinking about your worldview, and I can only imagine because I've been a founder, I've had an exit. You go from this sort of view of like, okay, I'm founder, this is my thing, I'm making decisions, I have control. You're
mhm,
then playing the diligence game where you're basically like, you want to make sure you have leverage, and it's an art, it's a bit of a dance, and then all of a sudden it closes and you have to work together, and now you're an employee.
yeah.
So is that a hard transition? Do you
Yes,
think?
it was.
Yeah.
And I think it was hard because I avoided or
Mm,
I didn't think about what I wanted and what was next for me in
mm.
terms of the transition we were making. And in fact, I would tell you I avoided thinking about it by taking on all of that work. And so when it was gone after and suddenly it was, yeah, I was I was unhappy. I was unhappy
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
quickly. And I mean, we were fortunate in that, they wanted us to stay, but it was
Mhm.
really we didn't have to stay.
That is also, frankly, a really great option for you to know that you didn't have to stay a certain time, which doesn't
Yes.
often happen.
Yes.
Usually there's a minimum term. And so you knew in your heart this was the time the business you got the business to this wonderful, successful point, this outcome. Let's talk about this personally for you from here on out. So you're leaving Maple's Labels, you
Yep.
decide to make the move.
Yep.
Um, you know, there's a period of, I want to call it cocooning, if you will, where you're in a big transition. You're taking a moment to kind of go, what do I do with my empty calendar? What's next?
Mhm.
What was that like for you to get to now where you are now? You're coaching, like you're in your element. You've written a book. I mean, what
Yep.
was that transition period like for you?
Well, it's like, even from like the moment you sell, then I was needed here at this level. And then I
Yeah,
said I was going to leave and we, made the announcement. And then I was needed like here at this level. Like nobody, the meeting invites dwindle off and you spend your last kind of weeks being like, should I go to the office today? Cause I don't think they
right,
really need me. Like there's this like
right,
impending date where you're like, things are really changing right now. You
right,
can feel the business moving on without you. And
right.
then I left. And I think almost immediately after I left, we like dropped our kids off at summer camp. Two of them were going to sleepaway camp. My daughter was in high school. She was going to do a travel credit. So we dropped the three of them
Mm,
off. And the two of us, my husband and I, went to Montreal for a few days on our own. We
mm,
came home. We, went to our cottage. We have a family cottage. The kids finally came home. And then we had a really big trip planned. We were going to a family reunion in Ireland. And so, like, the summer felt like, it was busy, right? We had a lot of things on. But when September came that year, my coach had told me I wasn't allowed to really dive into or commit to anything in 90 days, which I
smart,
think was a really valuable piece of advice. My problem was I got stuck there. Like when
right.
September came and I was on the couch and I was sort of like, to some of my Mabel friends, I was like, hey, do you want to go out for lunch? Do you want to catch up? Do you want to have a drink after work? And they were all like, I'm going to this trade show. I got to go to California. I got
Mm,
to, like they were all super busy in the new era building the next thing.
Mm.
And I got like, what am I going to do? And I think it was hard because like I led finance, I led IT, and I led our retail business. And I sort of came away feeling, like I'm not an accountant. I have no business being in charge of IT, like never written a line of code, I'm good at leading teams I don't have subject matter expertise on, but what do you turn that into when you're out in the
Right.
world? And so, in my own
Right.
head, I was really going around and around, and I really got stuck in terms of not
Mm.
knowing where I would go next.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can empathize with the feeling. For me, it was literally feeling like I don't know if I have any value if I don't have my business. I don't Yeah, does that
Yep.
resonate?
Yep.
It was hard and a very deep, lonely too, because who
Yes.
can you kind of go I mean, you had this wonderful financial outcome, but then your business is gone. It sounds like your
Hmm.
community was very tied to work as well. Is
It
that what I'm
was.
hearing about Mabel
Yeah.
friends, et cetera?
Yep.
It's challenging. So how did you come out of that moment? What was helpful for you to get through that transition?
Mm, it ended. So it took me, I did a couple of little like consulting gigs, but still like that voice in my head telling me like I wasn't good enough for the work I was trying
Mm.
to do was pretty strong.
Mhm.
But eventually I ended up getting a job running a business for somebody else, which
Yes.
was a really great opportunity.
Snugglebooks?
And yeah, it
Is that
was.
yeah.
And so I kind of had, the 135 people were reporting to me. I was reporting to the founder. He wanted to step away somewhat from the day to day and, do some family things and some travel. And so I stepped in to do that, which was an amazing opportunity because I still was in the children's product space, a little bit different
Mhm.
bricks and mortar retail and
Yeah.
web based e commerce. Um, and it was a really, really great experience with another great brand and a great team. And I learned a lot. One of the things was at that time, I was like, oh, I still feel like I want to go and build something for myself. And so that's really where I think I crystallized on this idea of, going back to a build of some kind. And
Beautiful.
so that led me then when I left there to work on getting a coaching certification so that I
Yeah.
would work with people then who were growing as leaders.
What a beautiful moment, and also I'm a very avid, customer of Snugglebug, so,
Yeah.
well versed in that, but just to be able to jump back in, I imagine, I don't know, but just for you to be able to be like, "Oh, yeah, those skills are there. I've got this." Be able to translate all of that into something and then go, "No, I'm still a builder at heart. I need to
Yes.
jump." So,
Yeah.
once a builder, always a builder?
Yes, I would say so. What I have built, though, over the last decade is a lot more of a solo practice kind of business. I mean, I do
Yeah.
have some support. I have people who help me, but it's not
Yeah.
the same on the team level. And so at the 10-year mark now, I sort of sit
Yep.
here saying, like, what do I want in the next decade is kind of the process I feel like
Yeah.
2025 has brought on me because and I don't know where I mean, I like the work I'm doing. I love the people I work
Mhm.
with. But there's a lot of time in these four walls that,
Yeah.
isn't tapping into a skill set that I have, which is that I'm really good at getting teams working together, getting the wheels rolling and lifting them up to speed. Um, so who knows? I don't know what'll be next, but
Oh,
I certainly feel for some reason I feel this decade piece of it,
yeah.
and I felt it coming, and I feel like something may be shifting, but I don't know what that is yet.
Oh, I am so excited to be on the sidelines and see what you create next, whatever it is, as you continue to build your practice as well. And so as you reflect on the planning and the preparation on the personal side, it sounded like you were so deep in the build of the business. This inbound call came in, this voicemail that changed everything. You follow this exit path, you execute on it, you get the deal done, you start the transition, you flow from there. But because you're checking off that huge spreadsheet, you hadn't necessarily thought about, what am I exiting to? As you think
Yes.
about the founders
Yeah.
listening who are pre-exit, what were some of the things personally that you perhaps wish you could have done if you could go back in time to prepare personally?
There was somebody I had on my podcast, and she talked about how you have to add before you subtract.
Mm,
And I was like, to me, that shed some light
mm,
on where I struggled, which
mm,
was that my efforts, I had a limited amount of hobbies, but not a lot. Um, my efforts and my heart was in building that business. And so when I did the giant subtract of leaving, I had not thought about, what were the things I should add in. And I think that kind of contributed to getting me stuck.
yeah,
Like I think, pinnacles and plateaus, right? Like I think as
yeah,
entrepreneurs, we're very wired at climbing for those pinnacles. We're not so wired to sitting on plateaus. And
yeah.
so like I just did not know what to do. And I didn't, it just took me a long time. And I ended up, probably in a smaller vision of myself than I should have.
Mm,
So I would really, encourage people to, try and think about that as part of the journey
yeah,
if you get into an exit journey or you are in an exit planning journey is, yeah, where do you want yourself? Because I think that, for the most part, like I'm very, very glad that I didn't have a 1 or 2 or 3 year period of time that I had to stay. I was very
yeah,
fortunate in that way. Um, but leaving is also hard.
yeah, yeah. It is, and there's a sense of loss, at least in my experience. Did you feel that a little bit? And again,
Yes,
it sounds there's a bit of a quiet loss there, and
absolutely.
coming through that emotionally,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, there is. There is. And, we can all do hard things. Like,
yeah,
it works out. But I do think when you feel like I think I was the founder who was going to be that founder who
yeah,
hung out in a boardroom, drinking coffee, reading a newspaper, and like basically distracting people after I was done at Mabel's.
mm,
And instead, it was this very fast, like out into the world, which was my choice. I
yeah,
did that, to be clear.
yeah.
Um, but I was not prepared for that.
And so designing something you're exiting to, and if you really looked at what you've built around you post and the way that you've designed your life after, do you think you could have tapped into some of that a little bit earlier in the build? Do you think that was
Yes.
possible? Could you have reached for it?
Yep. Yep. Like
It's hard to
thinking
see that
it
when you're
is
in it.
hard to see it at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also I think because, you know, as founders, we had developed roles for ourselves, and I had some
Uh-huh.
fairly clear pieces that I was working on that,
Yeah.
are very different to what I'm doing now. So I don't
Yeah.
know if when that piece of you, your head is in that, I don't know if you think about like going out trying different things so much.
Completely. Well, Julie, thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining. Is there one piece, one kind of action that you think a founder could do now if they're 2 years out from thinking about starting a sale process? Anything you'd
Well,
recommend?
I mean, 2 years is a magic time for setting up structures and, for the IQ pieces of the business, making sure that your practices and processes and all those things are good. But I think it's
Yeah.
also a great time for you to start thinking about what you really want.
Yeah.
I think we thought about what we really wanted from an IQ perspective, like how much money we needed to get on the table and, all of those kinds of things. But I don't think I thought for a minute about what were the EQ things that I needed to get out of it.
Oh, what a great way to close this. Thank you so much for joining the show and sharing your story. It was such an honor for me, Julie.
Thank you. It was so fun.
This podcast brings you conversations with founders who've made strategic exits, plus the advisors who guided them through the entire journey, before, during, and after the deal. Real expertise from people who've actually been there. Getting to the Deal is made for the Exit Horizon community, a private, highly vetted membership for Canadian entrepreneurs planning strategic exits. We discuss what most won't, how to maximize value, build systematically, and design what comes next. Connect with us, Exit Horizon, on LinkedIn, or reach me at Kristen@exithorizon.com. I'm Kristen Harrison. Subscribe to Getting to the Deal wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next week.